Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 So last night we started reading from chapter 6, entitled Priyatama, the most beloved. We read the first verse. This evening I have no introduction. I'm simply going to begin reading. And for the most part I may be reading and commenting only slightly, because otherwise I do not know how we will ever progress in these two chapters that I wish to speak about, especially since this is probably the last class I'm giving. But I'll be back, I think, relatively soon to be able to continue. So, we read about Narada Muni's journey to Lord Krishna's palace last night, and now beginning with next text. He sometimes tripped and fell to the ground, and sometimes stood motionless. Sometimes his body trembled, or he rolled on the ground, or he wept in great distress. He sometimes shouted and jumped about, sometimes sang and danced. Sometimes all the transformations of priceless love of God converged in him at once. My dear mother, please now be fully attentive. Listen soberly, with steady concentration, to what I am about to say. Commentary. Parikshit Maharaj wants his mother to listen carefully, so that the Supreme Lord's pastime he is about to describe will enchant her mind and awaken her ecstatic love. Parikshit knows from his own experience that the, quote, insanity of love for Krishna is in fact the most natural condition of the soul, and that devotees infected with this insanity are more sober and in touch with reality than anyone else. Parikshit Maharaj is simply requesting his mother here now. You've been listening very carefully to everything I've spoken up until now. Now be very fully attentive, because you've been trying to understand what is the ultimate conclusion of all that I've discussed so far. So now I'm going to be coming to the very essence of everything. Up until now we've been hearing about the Lord's participation in the lives of his different devotees. And what is this sound? Is this coming from in the temple room or outside the temple? With our fire alarm. His participation with his devotees. But just like Parikshit Maharaj, when he was hearing from Shukadeva Goswami, he would oftentimes inquire about a particular question or pastime or devotee, and he would ask the Lord to please describe everything in such a way so that I may lick up the nectar of the honey of the lotus feet of Krishna. In other words, Parikshit Maharaj, being a devotee of substance, wanted the essence. He wanted the substance of everything. And he wanted to be able to understand everything in terms of relationship of the Lord's pastimes, and specifically the Lord's pastimes, intimate pastimes of reciprocal exchanges of love with his devotees. And Shukadeva Goswami spoke the Bhagavatam in such a way that ultimately it culminated in the descriptions of the Lord's pastimes in Vrindavan, as described in the very beginning when one hears Srimad Bhagavatam. One begins in the first cantos, was compared to be the lower limbs of the body, of the feet and legs, and then one rises to the smiling face of the Lord, which is Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan with his devotees. So in this way, Shukadeva Goswami presented everything to Parikshit Maharaj in such a way that it would culminate in these narrations. So, and similarly, Parikshit Maharaj now is going to speak to his mother in the same way. And therefore he's asking his mother, now please listen very, very attentively, because what I'm about to tell you now is a very confidential secret. Just as Krishna said to Arjuna, he went into different levels of knowledge, and he went into knowledge which was confidential, more confidential, and culminated in most confidential in Bhagavad Gita. In the same way, now Parikshit Maharaj is telling his mother, now please prepare yourself and listen very attentively for the most confidential. So, therefore he's saying, if you listen, and as Srila Sanatana Goswami explains, that he's about to describe what this Lord's pastime is about to describe will enchant her mind and awaken her ecstatic love. Right. Parikshit Maharaj knows this from his own experience. Right? That how when he heard from the lips of Shukadeva Goswami. Now Shukadeva Goswami is described here in Brhad Bhagavatamrta, how Shukadeva Goswami, when he was speaking, he had to speak about, especially the gopis in Vrindavan, he had to speak in such a way that he would be able to contain his ecstasy so he could complete speaking the Bhagavatam. And therefore, he did not mention any of the names of the gopis in Vrindavan. He always spoke about this gopi, that gopi, if you read in the 10th canto, but never referring to the names of the gopis. And Radharani is there, but Radharani her name is there in a hidden form. And therefore, and it's explained here in Brhad Bhagavatamrta, that Shukadeva Goswami's reasons for that is that he was afraid that he would not be able to contain himself. And therefore he spoke in this way, so he would be able to complete the Bhagavatam, giving the essence, but he did not speak the names of the specific intimate gopis in his recitation. Otherwise, he would have displayed the same symptoms as we just saw, as Narada Muni displayed. He was unable to speak. Nothing would have been more terrible for him to be unable to complete, because he would not be able to speak properly. So, because Parikshit Maharaj was able to hear everything in this way, culminating in the Lord's pastimes, and hear everything, therefore, from his own experience, as he describes here, that what I'm about to tell you, this confidential knowledge, this will awaken your insanity of love for Krishna. And then a very nice point is also made, that although the word insanity is used, such devotees who experience this, they are infected with this insanity. They are more sober and in touch with reality than anyone else. Because obviously their reality is Krishna, this transcendent reality, as described beginning very first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam. Janmadhyasya yaton vayaritarata shateshu bhigiswarat. How Srimad Bhagavatam describes Lord Krishna as the transcendental reality. So, because such devotees are always filled with thoughts of Krishna, therefore they are always in touch with reality, even though externally it may appear that their behavior does not conform to social norms. And there are many verses in the Srimad Bhagavatam, in the 10th canto and 11th canto also, which describe that such devotees, they cannot always conform to the social norms. And we gave that example yesterday of how devotees who are situated in ecstatic love may behave in a way which may appear to contradict what we would expect to be proper behavior. Why? Because falling on the ground, tears falling from their eyes, unable to speak, sometimes such symptoms of the devotees is that mucus is coming from their mouth, from their eyes. These are symptoms of ecstatic love. And what to speak of when Lord Chaitanya would display these symptoms. His limbs and his body, they would sometimes extend, and sometimes they would compress into his body like a tortoise. And sometimes limbs of his body would extend, and there'd be a distance of many inches in between each joint of his limbs. This is what he was experiencing in manifesting of Asta Sattvika Bhava, the 8 Sattvika Bhavas we described, which are also described in different stages, and the most highest stage is when they're extremely inflamed, burning, inflamed. So, although externally such devotees may appear to manifest some symptoms, internally they're in touch with reality because they are associating with Krishna as they would be with Krishna in the spiritual world. In fact, sometimes it's even described, like the example is given, Madhavendra Puri. Madhavendra Puri is an acharya in our disciplic succession who was the first to manifest the conjugal relationship with the Supreme Lord. And he was always absorbed. Descriptions are given, especially in Chaitanya Charitamrita, that he wouldn't know whether it was day or night. He would sometimes fall on the ground, sometimes he would lose consciousness, sometimes he would stand, sometimes he wouldn't eat unless food came to him without making any endeavor for himself. He would never endeavor for food. And he was always absorbed in this consciousness day in and day out. And it's described that Madhavendra Puri, he would not take anybody, he would travel always alone and not keep association, because he wanted to be very careful to not associate in a way that he would speak prajalpa unnecessarily. So he traveled alone. So someone may say, well, Madhavendra Puri traveled alone, didn't associate with anybody. We should not think that was the case. Madhavendra Puri was certainly associating internally. And because he was always associating with the devotees internally, the topmost devotees, the devotees of the spiritual world within his heart, because he was experiencing this like transcendental television. The Lord's pastimes were manifesting within his heart like a television screen. It was simply always manifesting in his heart. Therefore, he was certainly associating with devotees. But externally, it appeared that he wasn't, but in his heart, he was always associating. So who's in touch with reality? Someone may say, he doesn't know whether it's day and night. It means he's obviously, if he doesn't know whether it's day and night, is he in touch with? No, of course. He's in touch with reality because he's always in reality. His mind, his thoughts, his words, his consciousness is always absorbed in reality. Krishna's pastimes is the only reality. And therefore such devotees may manifest such symptoms externally. And it's described that such devotees, after giving up this body, then they simply continue doing exactly what they've done. They no longer require this body. They continue to serve Krishna in their spiritual body. And for them, death is just simply like lightning and illumination which takes place simultaneously. For them, there's no experience of death. Right? They just simply continue doing that what they've already been doing. This Madhavendra Puri in his prayers. He offers prayers to the demigods, forefathers. He says, please forgive me, I can no longer conform to following all these sacred rituals of morality. He says, now wherever I go, wherever I sit, I simply sit and I simply remember the pastimes of Krishna within my heart. I think this is sufficient for me. So he's apologizing to the demigods. He's apologizing to the previous saintly person. Forgive me, I can't conform to your expectations. I think it's simply sufficient for me. Just always remember to Krishna. Just remember Krishna. So, this is of course the culmination. And therefore a devotee must learn how to practice this cultivation of Krishna consciousness while still executing his duties externally, but within his heart. Just like when Lord Chaitanya instructed Raghunath Das Goswami. He told Raghunath Das Goswami he do not speak like ordinary people, or do not be interested in hearing mundane topics, what ordinary people are speaking about. He said, do not look for opulent food or wear fancy clothing. And he says you should always chant Hare Krishna, and you should always remember the pastimes and worship Radha and Krishna within your heart. So he gave these instructions that externally you should appear like a renunciant. But internally, within your heart, you should always meditate on the pastimes of Radha and Krishna. So, therefore we see in the examples of the Goswamis, they were very austere, very strict, very renounced, and they were practicing very strict principles of renunciation. But despite that, within their hearts, they were always meditating on the pastimes of the Lord, and therefore they were situated on the topmost platform. So they're in touch with reality more than anyone else. So we'll continue. That day, Lord Krishna was for some reason disturbed in mind. Krishna is disturbed in mind. Okay. That day, Lord Krishna was for some reason disturbed in mind and asleep in the inner quarters. And Uddhava had left him and sat down nearby on a terrace at the edge of the palace. There, Uddhava was joined by Baladev, Devaki, and Rohini, and queens of Krishna like Rukmini and Satyabhama, as well as various maidservants and other ladies, including Kamsa's mother, Padmavati, a lady who had the habit of making public gossip out of Krishna's personal affairs. So, Krishna is disturbed in mind, if anybody wishes to understand. Because ordinarily, often it's very difficult for persons, unless they can understand a little bit about Krishna's nature and his loving affairs, for them, for the ordinary moralists who consider God to be the supreme being, the controller, proprietor, whatever it may be, and who's worshipped in awe and reverence, to hear that Krishna is sleeping late because his mind is disturbed. It's a tough one to swallow. It's I mean, that we can relate to that in one sense. Not Krishna, we can relate ourselves. Yeah, I don't want to get up in the morning because my mind is disturbed and I'm thinking about what I have to do today. So Krishna's mind is so disturbed that he doesn't want to get up. So, what is Krishna's mind so disturbed about that he's sleeping in, and everybody's sitting around outside his room saying, "What's going on?" Because everybody by this time, Krishna's usually always out, and he's dealing with his daily affairs. It's described in Krishna book how Krishna was every morning he would get up, but he would leave his wife in bed early, and he would perform his morning duties. Right? He would perform all his morning duties, and then he would meditate every morning. And Krishna's course, as Prabhupada describes, Krishna would sit and meditate every morning, but he was meditating on himself. Who else could Krishna meditate? So, but still, every morning in Dwarka, he was performing the same activities. And but this morning, particular morning, something was on his mind, and he couldn't get up because of. So, this is, of course, this is Leela, this is pastime. But what is it that can be so disturbing to the Lord? And to understand that, one actually has to understand the Lord's dealings with his devotees and how much the Lord is captivated by his unalloyed devotees. Like Krishna says to Durvasa Muni, so the devotee is always in my heart, and I'm always in the heart of my devotee. The devotee is always thinking about me, and I'm always thinking about him. So Krishna is always thinking about his devotees. Now, which devotees is Krishna always thinking about? Right? He's always thinking about very confidential devotees who steal his mind. In fact, in Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's described that when the gopis are chastising Krishna, this steals away his mind from the reverential hymns of the Vedas. He can't, even though the reverential Vedas personified will be offering prayers to the Supreme Lord and great reverence and worshipping the Lord, and the Lord will be hearing their prayers, but when the gopis chastise Krishna, it's just his mind, he doesn't hear. His mind goes someplace else. Why? Because this is what captures his mind. This is what captures these types of loving dealings capture his mind, swallow him whole, consume him. So much so, like the example is given by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, like when the bee enters into the lotus flower and is tasting the nectar or the honey of the lotus flower, then sometimes the lotus will close on the bee. But the bee doesn't mind because there's so much nectar inside. So in the same way, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gives the example that when Krishna enters into the hearts of his devotees and he's reciprocating internally what's happening within the devotee's heart, he forgets himself. He becomes covered, just like the bee becomes covered by the lotus flower. But he doesn't mind being covered as long as he's in that heart, because there's so much nectar in that heart that he's just relishing it. Right? He's not even aware that this is the bee. He's not even aware that the lotus flower is closed over him. Doesn't make any difference. What does he have to worry? He's not missing anything outside the lotus flower. There's so much nectar in there that let it stay closed. Doesn't make any difference. He doesn't even know it's closed. He's just enjoying the nectar. So in the same way, Krishna is not aware that he's forgotten his divine position, and he is just relishing the heart of his devotee. So, just as his devotee sometimes becomes disturbed, especially in feelings of intense separation, Krishna also experiences viraha bhav. He experiences intense separation. But who does he feel intense separation for? He feels intense separation that when he's in Dwarka, when somebody is reminding him about those devotees who are in Vrindavan, who are experiencing intense separation from him, Krishna's thinking about them. So much so that he can't get up. He just can't. Everybody's waiting. The wives are waiting. The kings are waiting. Everybody's waiting. Krishna can't get up. Why this morning is so different than any other morning? Well, Narada Muni has something to do with it. I'll tell you that much. Narada Muni is he was the instigator. And we probably won't get to it, but we'll read a little more. So, commentary. Precisely why Lord Krishna was disturbed, Parikshit will reveal to his mother a little further on his narration. I didn't reveal it yet either. He does not want her to become agitated by hearing this too soon. And then, Padmavati was Ugrasena's wife. The Shrishti Kanda of the Padma Puranas describes that after their marriage, she stayed a short time in the house of her father, King Satyaketu, at that time a demonic messenger of Kuvera named Drumila or Gobhila, became attracted to him by disguising himself as Ugrasena. He seduced her. The child born from this illicit connection was Kamsa. Here's Kamsa. Okay, text 9. All of them sat there silent, in shock. They saw that Sri Narada had arrived. He was acting strange. Commentary. These devotees who would regularly take part in Krishna's daily palace activities were dismayed that Krishna was lying in bed way past time he normally rose. It was obvious to them that something was seriously wrong, but they couldn't discern exactly what. Nonetheless, they now had to attend to Narada's arrival. Text 10. Standing up, they brought him carefully to where they had been sitting. They took a moment to restore him to a condition closer to normal and wiped dry his face, wet with tears of love. Then they spoke to him simply and gently. They said, "We have never seen you behave like this. What is this sudden change in you, dear Brahman? Please sit here quietly for a moment." Sri Parikshit said, Narada replied in a choking voice, tears flowing from his eyes. As he began to speak, he opened his eyes with difficulty and bowed down to offer respects. He was trembling, and the hairs on his body stood erect. Sri Narada said, "Please arrange for me to meet with Uddhava, the only true object of exquisite good fortune. Or else let me have from his feet one particle of dust. Then alone will my heart be at peace." In other words, what's Narada thinking right now? He just came and heard from Ugrasena all about who Uddhava is. And at this particular stage, Narada is so much absorbed in how wonderful Uddhava is, that, and understanding Uddhava's relationship with the Lord, and obviously understanding the position of the Lord and the glories of the Lord, he's experiencing such ecstasy. He's so much absorbed. He's saying, "Please bring Uddhava before me," that he doesn't even see that Uddhava is standing right in front of him. He has received an abundance of our Lord's mercy, never gained by the Lord's other servants, in the past or even now. Because Uddhava is the greatest of all Vaishnavas, the Lord himself calls Uddhava one of his own special expansions. Commentary. In the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, 11:16-29, when Lord Krishna, speaking to Uddhava, describes his own opulent expansions in the material world, he declares Uddhava his representative among the Vaishnavas. Vasudevo Bhagavatam Tvam tu Bhagavateshvaham. Among those entitled to the name Bhagavan, I am Vasudev, and you, Uddhava, indeed represent me among the devotees. Text 15. No one has ever been as dear to the Lord, neither the Lord's direct sons like Brahma, nor friends like Shiva, nor brothers like Balaram, nor the goddess Rama, or the Lord's other wives. Not even his own unique transcendental body is as dear. Commentary. The original Sankarshana is Sri Balaram, Lord Krishna's brother and constant companion. Narada can dare to say that Uddhava is more dear to Krishna even than Balaram and other supreme persons, because Krishna himself has said this to Uddhava. Nat tata me priyatama atma yonir na shankara na cha shankarshana nashya naivatma cha yata bhavan. My dear Uddhava, neither Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, Lord Sankarshan, the goddess of fortune, nor indeed my own self is as dear to me as you. This is Srimad Bhagavatam 11:14-15. Now we'll hear a very interesting point from Sanatana Goswami about why Krishna uses Uddhava's name in this verse. According to the commentary of, this is from Srila Sridhar Swami. According to the commentary of Srila Sridhar Swami, when Lord Krishna in the Bhagavatam spoke this verse, he meant to say, as dear to me as my devotee. But in the ecstasy of his friendship with Uddhava, he at the last moment switched for bhakta, devotee, the word bhavan, you. The Lord's original intention, however, had been to glorify all his pure devotees. Srila Sanatana Goswami, therefore, earlier in his commentary on Brhad Bhagavatamrta, cited this verse in praise of Prahlad, and now he cites it again in praise of Uddhava. So actually, this is a very common verse, a very popular verse. When Krishna, it's quoted many places. Chaitanya Charitamrita is quoted many times. Chaitanya Bhagavat is quoted many times. The Lord is speaking to Uddhava and saying, no one is as dear to me. You're even more dear to me than Brahma, Shiva, Balaram, Goddess Rama, Lord's wives, his own body. He's actually speaking about his devotee. But in his ecstasy, because he was speaking to Uddhava at the last moment, he switched and said, you, instead of my devotee. But actually he means his devotee. Such is the position of the devotee, so dear to the Lord. Is that verse where, what is that? Krishna says that anything that's offered to him is as good, to my devotees, as good as offering to me. Even if one takes birth in a family of dog eaters, whatever offered to him is as good as being offered to me, and everything that is offered to him should be accepted. But I can't remember somehow the Sanskrit. It's not there in my mind. And then also, Uddhava, Krishna says to Uddhava, by the dust of the lotus feet of my pure devotee, I desire to purify the entire material world which is situated within me. Thus I always follow in the footsteps of my devotees and take their dust. Krishna follows in the footsteps of his pure devotees. And he says, well, how am I going to purify this material world? My pure devotees. I'll send them, and by the dust of their feet, they'll purify this material world. And I'll follow behind them and take their dust. We'll read one more verse. The Supreme Lord's own words, disclosed in the Puranas, tell the abounding glories of Uddhava's good fortune. Those words, born of Sri Krishna's causeless mercy, are unlike any others heard in this world. The Uddhava heroes now tell those words in songs. Alas, when those words enter the home of my heart through the gateway of the ears, they steal all my wealth of sobriety. This is, as we said, I think this is Narada Muni continuing to speak about Uddhava. In the commentary, Narada is an authorized acharya of the Vaishnava Sampradaya. For him, therefore, the highest evidence by which to prove anything is the expressed opinion of the personality of Godhead and the effect of the Lord's words on the thoughts and behavior of his devotees. In regard to Uddhava, Krishna has stated his opinion clearly. And then there are some verses quoted about Uddhava's position, how dear he is to the Lord. And then the commentary is concluded by stating that professional thieves in ancient India were proficient in using narcotic powders to put unsuspecting householders into a stupor so that their houses could be easily robbed. We can read the details of these methods in minor literary works such as Dandi's Dashakumara Charita. Narada alludes to such criminal skills in describing the looting of his own heart by the glories of Uddhava. He's using this example. My heart is being looted by hearing the glories of Uddhava. Just as these professional thieves, they would put the householders unsuspecting householders into a stupor by using these powders so they could steal everything from their houses. So Narada's heart has been stolen by hearing the glories of Uddhava. So it's just a couple of minutes and I will have to end here. And as I said, I am not going to be here to continue. There is still a substantial amount more in these two chapters. I will continue when I return, but I've tried to present in such a way to hopefully enliven or encourage all of you to read, if you would like, this Brhad Bhagavatamrta and find out what is this confidential Leela. What is it that Krishna is going to disclose by his own behavior and then reveal by his own words to Narada, which will illustrate who is the greatest recipient of his mercy. Of course, we may be able to jump forward and project who that may be. But why? This is why. Why is that? And does that mean that if they're the greatest recipients of Krishna's mercy, that we are destined to be devoid of mercy? No. That point is also so clearly established in the concluding section of this Brhad Bhagavatamrta, that nobody from among his devotees, no matter where they are situated, whether in Goloka, whether in Vaikuntha, whether in this material world, none of his devotees who have Krishna, absorbed in thoughts of Krishna, will ever be devoid of Krishna's mercy. None of them. And this is revealed in the next chapter, in chapter 7. And please read further, and we'll continue next time. It's time for Arti. We'll end here. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Glories to Srila Prabhupada.